Human rights groups sue Trump administration over ICC sanctions. Courthouse News, Reuters, The Hill, and The Guardian describe a legal challenge to sanctions tied to the International Criminal Court, with the next action expected in court filings or administration notices. The key point is process, not politics. The case tests how far the federal government can go when advocacy groups say an order chills work with an international tribunal. Watch the docket, any Justice Department response, and whether groups report practical limits on legal support or human rights documentation. Until a judge or agency publishes the next dated record, the reliable version is the shared source timeline, not speculation about motives or outcomes. A later order could narrow the sanctions, leave them in place, or set a hearing that clarifies what groups can safely do while the case moves forward. Courthouse News frames the dispute around advocacy work, while Reuters emphasizes the anti-ICC sanctions push. The Hill and The Guardian add that the administration policy is now being tested through public litigation, so the next dated filing should show whether plaintiffs seek emergency relief, a narrower order, or a full schedule for briefing. That record should also show whether judges treat the sanctions as an urgent speech and advocacy burden, or as a foreign policy measure that remains intact during briefing. 2 soldiers are dead after a military helicopter crashes in Texas, sparking a fire. Reuters, NBC News, The Guardian, and CBS News report a U.S. Army helicopter crash tied to the Fort Hood area, with local fire response and military notification now central to the timeline. The stakes are safety, family notification, and the official accident investigation rather than any unverified cause. Viewers should watch for Army casualty releases, the aircraft unit involved, National Transportation Safety Board or military safety updates, and local fire containment reports from Salado area officials. The responsible reading is that a fatal military aviation incident happened and that investigators still have to establish the sequence. The next meaningful update should say whether flights are paused, whether witnesses or maintenance records are being reviewed, and when the Army expects preliminary findings. Reuters identifies the incident as a Texas Army helicopter crash, while NBC and CBS point to the deaths and the fire response. The Guardian adds wildfire context, so the next useful record is an Army safety update that names the aircraft, confirms the unit, and separates verified causes from early field reports. It should also clarify whether maintenance, training conditions, or airfield operations are under review, and whether other crews receive temporary restrictions while investigators work. The Army record should also specify notification status and safety steps for crews. Powerful storms in U.S. Midwest leave 3 dead and 800,000 without power. Reuters, The Guardian, NBC News, and CBS News report severe weather across Midwestern states, with deaths, widespread outages, and utility restoration timelines driving the public impact. The story matters because power failures can quickly become health, traffic, and emergency response problems after the storm line moves on. Watch state emergency bulletins, utility outage maps, shelter notices, and any revised fatality or damage counts. The safest reading is that the weather threat has shifted from active storms to recovery, debris, and grid repair. A useful next update should separate confirmed deaths from preliminary local reports, identify the hardest-hit counties, and show whether restoration crews expect hours or days before most customers are back online. Reuters and NBC both point to mass outages, while The Guardian emphasizes deaths across the Midwest. CBS coverage helps confirm the public safety frame, so the next useful record is a county-by-county restoration estimate that separates confirmed casualties, open shelters, closed roads, and utility repairs still waiting on crews. It should also name the lead state agencies, the utilities with the largest remaining outages, and whether cooling centers, medical backup power, or debris removal are still needed. State reports should also specify priority hospitals, vulnerable residents, and counties where restoration or cleanup will take longest. A fight over abortion and surrogacy ends with a baby born in Texas. The New York Times, The Guardian, The Hill, and CBS News describe a multi-state dispute involving reproductive law conflict, medical care, and Texas intervention after a baby was born with a severe heart defect. This is a sensitive legal and medical story, so the public facts should stay limited to court actions, hospital care decisions, and statements from named officials or attorneys. Viewers should watch for the next Dallas area court order, any Texas Attorney General filing, and updates on who has authority to approve care. The main stake is not spectacle. It is how conflicting state laws, parental rights, and urgent medical choices are handled in real time. A dated court entry or hospital statement should clarify the next legal step without exposing private medical details beyond what sources verify. The New York Times frames the dispute as a surrogacy and abortion law case, while The Guardian centers the birth and medical condition. The Hill adds Texas intervention, and CBS coverage helps track court timing, so the next useful record is a signed order that states who can authorize urgent care. It should also clarify which state has jurisdiction over each decision, how emergency treatment is being handled, and whether privacy limits restrict what officials can release next. U.S. inflation cooled slightly to 3.4% in July, but prices still elevated. The Guardian, PBS, BNN, Bloomberg, and The Washington Post report that inflation eased but remains high enough to keep pressure on household budgets and policymakers. The practical question is whether cheaper fuel or selected categories are enough to offset rent, groceries, services, and borrowing costs that consumers still feel. Viewers should watch the next CPI details, Federal Reserve comments, wage data, and retailer guidance for signs that price pressure is narrowing or spreading. The responsible reading is mixed. The headline rate improved, but elevated prices are still part of daily life. A useful next update should identify which categories cooled, which stayed sticky, and whether central bank officials treat the report as progress or as a reason to stay cautious. PBS and BNN Bloomberg both stress that lower gasoline helped cool the rate, while The Guardian keeps the focus on prices that remain elevated. The Washington Post adds national policy context, so the next useful record is the category detail showing whether rent, groceries, services, or energy change the trend. It should also show whether families are seeing relief in bills or only a slower rise from a still painful price level. The report should also compare monthly and yearly movements so viewers know whether relief is broad or narrow. Deaths damage reported as severe weather spawns tornadoes, flash flooding in the Midwest. AP News, local outlets, and regional newspapers report tornadoes, flash flooding, damage, and fatalities across parts of the Midwest. This story overlaps with the broader outage picture but adds a more local emergency management focus, where tornado reports are confirmed, which roads or neighborhoods flooded, and what residents are being told to do next. Viewers should watch National Weather Service surveys, county emergency updates, shelter information, and revised damage assessments. The safest version is to treat early totals as provisional until officials complete checks. A useful next update should distinguish confirmed tornado tracks from storm reports, list affected counties, and clarify whether the largest risk is still flooding, debris, closed roads, or power restoration. AP News anchors the storm and flooding report, while the Herald Bulletin, Seattle Times, and Marietta Daily Journal extend the local damage picture. The next useful record is a National Weather Service survey or county emergency bulletin that separates confirmed tornado tracks from flood rescues, road closures, and outage recovery. It should also say whether warnings have expired, which rivers or roads remain dangerous, and how officials are prioritizing crews between rescues, assessments, and power repair. Local officials should also identify shelter demand, flooded routes, and when inspectors expect final storm damage confirmations. Brazil's Supreme Court upholds laws that led to downfall of Amazon soy moratorium. AP News and other outlets report that Brazil's High Court upheld laws connected to the end of a forest-linked crop policy watched by farmers, exporters, environmental groups, and global buyers. The stakes are commercial and environmental. The ruling can affect how soy linked to deforested land is monitored, financed, and sold. Viewers should watch for the written decision, reactions from agribusiness groups, environmental organizations, and any guidance from Brazilian regulators. The responsible reading is that the court has strengthened the legal position of the challenged laws, but implementation details still matter. A useful next update should explain whether companies change sourcing rules, whether states adjust enforcement, and whether any new lawsuit or appeal follows. AP News and The Washington Post anchor the court decision, while Oskaloosa Herald and KTVN show the ruling moving through a wider public news chain. The next useful record is the written order or regulatory response explaining whether soy buyers, state officials, or environmental monitors change compliance rules after the decision. It should also show whether buyers keep voluntary forest rules, whether producers challenge private sourcing limits, and how Amazon monitoring groups interpret the court-backed laws. Regulators should also state whether existing contracts, farm finance, and forest risk audits change immediately or after review. Live updates: Trump says U.S. has total control over Strait of Hormuz and might keep it. Reuters, CBS News, The Hill, and CNBC report claims and pushback around control of the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point for Gulf energy shipments. The key issue for the public is not the phrase itself, but whether shipping risk, insurance costs, naval posture, or oil prices change. Watch official U.S. military statements, Gulf shipping advisories, tanker traffic data, and market reaction at the next energy close. The safest reading is that political claims need to be tested against maritime facts and commercial behavior. A useful next update should show whether ships reroute, whether regional governments respond, and whether any formal policy follows the public remarks. Reuters anchors the control claim, CBS carries the live update frame, and The Hill adds a diplomatic challenge to the wording. CNBC keeps the market angle in view, so the next useful record is tanker traffic, an official military statement, or an all-market close that shows whether risk actually changed. It should also indicate whether commercial insurers, Gulf ports, or regional navies alter behavior, because those operational details matter more than political wording alone. Shipping notices should also show whether tanker schedules, port calls, naval patrols, or insurance premiums actually changed, with practical evidence from shipping operators and regional port authorities. Zelenskyy says Ukraine has sent proposals to U.S. to end war with Russia. Reuters, Al Jazeera, The Guardian, and Anadolu report that Ukraine has given U.S. negotiators proposals while the war continues and battlefield pressure remains high. The story matters because diplomatic language can signal movement, but proposals are not the same as an agreed framework. Viewers should watch for statements from Kyiv, Washington, and Moscow, plus whether allies describe security guarantees, territory, sanctions, or sequencing. The responsible reading is cautious. Talks may define positions without producing near-term peace. A useful next update should say whether the United States acknowledges receipt, whether Russia responds, and whether military events on the ground make negotiations more or less plausible. Reuters frames the proposals as material delivered to U.S. negotiators, while Al Jazeera repeats Kyiv's public position. The Guardian adds battlefield pressure, and Anadolu tracks regional diplomacy, so the next useful record is confirmation from Washington, a response from Moscow, or details on security guarantees and sequencing. It should also identify whether the proposals cover ceasefire timing, occupied territory, prisoner exchanges, reconstruction funding, or long-term guarantees that allies would have to support. Diplomatic statements should also show whether the proposal is public, private, preliminary, or tied to battlefield concessions, with details specific enough for allies and voters to judge feasibility.